going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I want to give my 2.5-year review on the 2021 Panigale V2. And this is it here, of course. I purchased this motorcycle brand new in April 2021. I put about 3,000 miles on it so far. In the first year that I had it, that's actually when I put most of the mileage on it. I put about 1,500 miles on it or so in that year. And then shortly after that, I actually purchased this Husqvarna Vitpillen 401. And this is pretty much what I commute on. And since I've gotten this, I put 5,000 miles on this and about 1,500 miles on the Panigale V2. So a question I get asked a lot with this bike is, well, what about the issues? It's Italian, it's a Ducati. Have you had any problems with the bike? So for me, no major issues. I did have a few small ones. One of those was when the bike was brand new, it was sometimes almost impossible to get it into neutral. The dealership actually warned me about this and said that this is kind of an inherent problem with these. If that does happen where it's just super difficult to get it into neutral, shut the bike off and then put it into neutral from either first or second gear. So that solution did work for me. That problem did go away after right around the first oil change. The first oil change for these is 620 miles. Most motorcycles, that's about the interval anyway. But after that first oil change, or around then, maybe a little before, that problem did kind of solve itself. So what would happen there is, depending on if you were in either first gear or second gear, the shifter would be so stiff that it was impossible to either push down or up, depending on what gear you were in, gentle enough for you to only go into neutral and not to either second gear or first gear, depending on what position you were starting from. Another issue that I had was I lost a few fasteners pretty much right away. I would say within the maybe first 200 miles or so, 250 miles, I lost a few of the fairing fasteners. I lost the one, I lost this one here, which kind of stunk because I didn't notice right away. So this fairing was a little bit loose as I was riding. Again, didn't have that fastener there, so it actually scratched the fairing a little bit on the rear brake lever there. So that kind of stunk. I lost, I think, one of these, if I remember right. And then there was another fastener somewhere else that just kind of fell off pretty much right away. And the last issue that I have to report is once in a while, the bike would stall every so often. It seemed like when the bike was really hot, so when I was riding in summertime during the day, once in a while it would stall as I'm coming to a stop. So in neutral, either clutch pulled in or not, didn't seem to matter. Once in a while, the bike would just shut off. It would start right back up, however, so that's good. I don't know if I can necessarily fault Ducati for that. That's a pretty common problem with a lot of the Euro 4 and Euro 5 bikes. So and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but after I tuned the bike, I got a brand tune for it, flashed it. After that, never had that issue ever again. But stock, that was an issue. Just kind of I don't know, I would say it happened maybe a half dozen times or so, something like that, maybe a little bit more. Just so everyone knows, there is a outstanding recall on these motorcycles as well. I haven't experienced this, I haven't experienced an issue with it, but what the recall is for, at least my understanding, is there's some type of sensor, like a photocell sensor, that can sense the ambient lighting around the motorcycle. And based on that sensor, it will change the appearance of the display. So basically, if you're in a low light situation, it'll make the display to where it's not so bright and you can see a little bit better. If you're in a situation where you have a lot of light, it will again change the display to adapt to your surroundings. Basically, there's a recall for that. Supposedly that sensor malfunctions, it doesn't work all the time. I haven't had an issue with it, but just so everybody knows, that is a known problem with the V2s. So that being said, really don't have any complaints about this bike as far as reliability and durability goes. Really can't complain. Never got stranded or anything like that. Never had to go back to the dealer for warranty work. Just have been able to enjoy the ownership experience. If there is one thing that I could complain about with these bikes, it's definitely going to be the parts cost. Not a secret, everybody knows that, so I'm not gonna get into it too much, but just as an example, even the factory Ducati parts, so like the rear seat delete, I think this thing is $400 or something like that. By the time you actually get it, so ship, tax, it's definitely gonna be over $400, but it is really nice. It fits super nice. The finish is good. There's some nice little details. So the Ducati decal with the Italian flag, it's all cleared over and everything. Same goes with like your tank protector, all the carbon fiber parts. So on this bike, all the carbon parts are OEM Ducati parts. They're super expensive, but they're super nice. So for example, you know, the front hugger, right? The part's flawless. It fits super nice, but I think this hugger, by the time when I actually got it, I think it was like $500 for just the one piece, right? Any of the non-factory Ducati parts, also gonna be very expensive, right? Anything Motocourse, anything AEM factory, anything like that, any of the exhaust systems, right? If you want a full exhaust for one of these bikes, for example, in Acura, that's like a $5,500 exhaust. It does come with an up map, but supposedly that up map is not really that great. If you want Terminonis, they're $40-something hundred, no flash. Spark, same thing, $40-something hundred, no flash. So the part price is really, really expensive. But the quality is really good. Again, it's not really a secret, so you can't complain. It's not like it's a surprise, but if I could complain about one thing, it would probably be that. Okay, so now we know only issues that I really had is the recall for the screen, the issue with getting into neutral, losing fasteners, the stalling issue. However, the stalling issue pretty much got fixed with the flash, and then aftermarket part prices, aftermarket also including like the accessory factory Ducati stuff. I guess a small complaint there too is part availability is kind of sucks sometimes. Everything comes from Italy, right? So you may order a part and you might not get it for a few months, which if you're patient is okay, but just not an ideal scenario, right? You paid for the part, you paid $500 for this dumb piece of carbon fiber or whatever the case may be, and you might get it in 6 to 12 weeks or whatever. Now let's get to some of the good. So first thing I'll say is obviously the Panigale series is just striking to look at. The V2 is very clean. It doesn't have the gills that the newer V4s have, right? The new V4s, obviously, those are awesome motorcycles as well. I may get one in the near future. But they're a little bit more wild looking, right? They've got a lot going on, a lot of gills, a lot of fins, winglet, stuff like that. The V2 is very, very, the aesthetic is very simple, yet it sticks out, right? Nothing looks like a Panigale, right? Nothing out there, right? Very, very striking to look at. All the little details are really beautiful as well. So just for example, even the little reservoir stays, they're a nice billet aluminum piece. They've got the little cutouts in them. The way they've done the rear suspension, right? It's just, it looks like art. It's got the single side swing arm. On this bike, it has the Marcassini forged wheels from a V4R. V4S also has the same wheels, but everything is just, the aesthetic is just fantastic on these, right? Nothing looks like a Panigale, right? The way the LEDs are, they're very, very striking to look at. I get a lot of comments on this bike, both from people who ride, but mostly from people who don't ride, surprisingly. So a lot of comments from people who, all that they know about motorcycles is there's Harley Davidsons and there's sport bikes, and that's it. They don't know anything else. And I still get a lot of comments when I ride this bike. So I can definitely tell that the Italians designed these. I want to mention the quality on these bikes as well. So I do all the maintenance myself. I've done all the aftermarket parts myself. Not that there's a ton done to it, but everything that is done to it, I've done it myself. I haven't found any strip fasteners on this bike at all. I also notice whenever I take it apart, whenever I take the fairings apart, whenever I take stuff off this bike, it goes back together very easy too. I never have to fight with the plastics to get it back on. Whereas, for example, on my Husqvarna, I'm always trying to fight with it to put it back together because the panels don't really fit quite right. You gotta kind of twist the plastics to get them in place, and even then they just don't fit the way they should. With this bike, I have not had that issue at all. Everything goes back the way it should. All the little stays for the little lines or the wires or whatever the case may be, it all goes back together very, very nicely, which I like, right? I mean, this bike has been apart a ton of times for maintenance and to do modifications and stuff like that. As you can see, all the gaps are still perfect, right? Everything still fits really, really nice on this bike. So overall, right, quality is something that is part of what you're paying for. All the controls are super nice. They have a really premium feel to them when you click all the buttons, right? Everything is just very, very premium on this bike. I'm really, really happy with the overall quality. Of course, this is pretty much, this is a base model Panigale, so it doesn't have Ohlins and all that super duper nice stuff. But again, all the controls, everything that is here, even though it's a base model, is really, really nice. I'm really, really happy with the overall quality. All the fasteners are really nice. Again, I haven't found any of them stripped or anything like that. I haven't found that any of the fasteners round off easy or anything. I haven't had a situation where I've needed to clean up the threads of a fastener or anything like that. It's just been a real pleasure to work on this bike. Riding the Panigale V2, it's just pure joy. It's such a nice bike to ride. It's nice and narrow, unlike a V4. V4s, they're great too. Again, I've been thinking about maybe getting a V4 variant in the near future, but they are much wider, right? Especially the later ones, the wide body V4s, they're quite a bit wider between the legs. So it feels like a much more substantial bike. It actually feels heavier. I don't know if it's the seating position or where the weight is, right? Because the V2 and the V4, the curb weights are very, very similar. They're within, a few pounds of each other, but actually sitting on a V4 compared to a V2, at least for me, the V4 feels much bigger, okay? So on a V2, you have a nice narrow frame. It's very, very narrow to sit on. It feels like a small bike. It doesn't feel like a 955cc sport bike, right? And that kind of brings us to the engine, right? So V2, 155 horsepower rated, with a tune, exhaust, stuff like that. You're probably more like low 160s, maybe 165, possibly if you have an aftermarket air filter and stuff like that, but right around there, right? But so not near the power of the 1103cc V4 and V4S, not near the power of the 998cc V4R. Of course, right? Those are all 200 plus horsepower bikes. Good thing about the V2 though is the power is very usable. So you have plenty of torque down low. You have long sport bike gears, but they're not ridiculously long. They're not super long. So you can utilize the transmission pretty effectively just on the street without totally going crazy with the speed, right? You have a lot of the big sport bikes, your R1s, your S1000s, stuff like that. I mean, your first gear goes to like 90 miles an hour, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not a drawback or anything like that. It's just on the street, it's just a little bit more difficult to use that, right? In first gear, you're already like 30 miles an hour over the maximum speed limit on the freeway, right? So on a V2, you do have long gears, but they're not crazy long. You have a lot more torque down low. You don't have all your power super high in the RPM range like the V4R, the Superleggera, right? Those engines have a lot of peak power, right? But it's all up top, right? They're a little bit soft down low. The V2 for on the street, I think is perfect. Plus you get the classic Ducati twin sound, right? So the V2s with the right exhaust, I think sound better than the V4s. The V2 has a way more deeper, more guttural. It almost sounds like a V8 almost, if it has the right exhaust, right? If you have one of these little bit more quieter exhausts like the Aero and stuff like that, the Acras even, you don't get that tone. The little bit louder exhaust on the V2s, the sound is really, really great. I think better than the V4s. But again, back to overall riding experience on the V2, transmission super smooth. The engine is great for around town, right? You have that torque, but you also have a lot of top end as well. Not the top end that you would have from a V4, of course, right? But still plenty of top end. I mean, it's not like a Harley or something like that where you have a lot of torque, but your red line's at 5,500 RPM, you have no top end power, right? That's not so with these. The ride is also pretty good. It's a little stiff, but it's not unbearable. So I've taken this bike on a few little bit longer trips, about like an hour or so one way, and had no issues at all. So of course, a little bit of pressure on your wrist, you're gonna feel it in your back just a little bit, but it's not so uncomfortable that you can't ride it for an extended period of time, right? Again, it's not gonna be like a Harley where you can just ride it across the country, you'll be perfectly fine. It's not like that. It's not like sitting on your couch and just riding into the distance, right? You're definitely gonna have to take some breaks sometimes, but it's not ridiculous to ride one of these for an extended period of time. I'll kind of show you here just how narrow this bike is, right? It's very, very narrow when you sit on it. It doesn't feel like a 955cc motorcycle, which I really like. Obviously, I'm a smaller guy. I'm not really big in stature or anything like that. So any bike that feels really, really wide or just really bulky, I don't really like that. And this bike, I get the performance, get a ton of power, ton of usable power, right? Big displacement, meaning that it has a lot of torque, has a lot of low end without feeling like I'm sitting on a big bulky motorcycle, all right? So just overall, this bike, it's really poised. The electronic suite is really nice. Quick shifter up and down. The quick shifter works super good. It's not jerky. It's never, you never feel a ton of resistance either shifting up or down. It's very, very well done. The brake engagement's really smooth. The clutch engagement's really smooth. Obviously this is as we can see, it's a hydraulic clutch, which is nice too. You have some pretty high-end bikes out there which still use a cable. Again, not necessarily knocking that, but it is nice to have a hydraulic clutch, okay? Another thing I wanted to mention, as far as this doesn't really have to do with specifically the Panigale V2, but more just the Ducati ownership experience. So for me, most of you are probably gonna think this is kind of lame. That's fine, I don't care. But for me, it's kind of cool. Ducati has they have a pretty strong merchandise business. So I'm pretty lucky. I get to travel quite often throughout the year, and when I do travel, it's kind of fun going to these different Ducati dealerships and buying their merchandise, their shirt, their hat, get a keychain, a license plate frame, something like that. For example, if in Miami, I'll get a Ducati Miami t-shirt. When I'm in Tampa, I'll get a Ducati Tampa Bay hat. Indianapolis, same thing, right? As I make my travels, I can stop at the local dealership and see if they have any specific merchandise for that area, which is kind of fun, right? You're not, let's just be honest, right? You're not going to do that for your Kawasaki or your Suzuki or something like that. Nothing wrong with those bikes, but you're not going to do that with those types of bikes, right? So with Ducati, they have some really nice merchandise, right? They have some really cool shirts and towels and stuff like that. But something that's not mentioned that very often is just that you have that ownership experience where you can go to these other places when you're on vacation, out of town, traveling for work, whatever the case may be, and you can go to a local dealership and get specific merchandise for that area that you're in, which for me is pretty fun, right? I wouldn't buy a Ducati just for that reason, obviously. I mean, that's extra lame, right? But I wouldn't do it just for that reason. But it's kind of a nice bonus that not many people talk about, and it's not an experience that you would get with really any other brand, maybe Triumph, but other than that, you wouldn't get it with MV Agusta because they have a really small dealer network. You're not going to get it with any of the Japanese bikes. Harley Davidson, I guess you can get that experience, but those are Harleys. It's a totally different world, basically. So final thoughts on the Panigale V2. I don't regret the purchase at all. Glad I bought it. I'd be lying if I said that I never thought about that I should have gotten a V4 to begin with. I definitely thought about that before. And again, I'm looking at possibly getting one here in the near future. I don't know if I would trade this one in. I may get it in addition to the V2. It makes sense to trade in the V2 for a V4. It doesn't really make financial sense to have two Panigales, right? They basically serve the same purpose. They're not really that different. So if I'm thinking with my brain, it makes sense to trade in the V2, but I just don't really want to. I like the V2 sound. I like how narrow it is. When I sit on a V4, especially the last iteration. So I think that started in 2022, I think. If I'm wrong, go ahead and get in the comments and roast me. But I think 2022, they started the latest iteration, which has the higher seat. The winglets are a little bit different. The body's a little bit different, stuff like that. They made some other improvements, but especially when I sit on the latest iteration, that bike feels really big and feels really heavy, right? Again, I don't know if it's just the way the seating position is or where the weight is, but that bike feels really, really bulky. I don't feel that as much with the 2020 to 2021. So if I do get a V4 variant, it will probably be that last generation. So I think that's 2020 to 2021, I think was when the wide body V4 started. So if I do get one, it would probably be that. Still kind of tossing it around, thinking about it, right? But I don't regret the V2 purchase at all, right? I think for the street, this is the way to go. Again, it would be nice to have the extra power of the V4. I know that the V4s are smoother. The engine is smoother to ride. I will say this V2 at low RPMs, it does vibrate quite a bit. You do get that kind of classic Ducati twin vibration, but it does smooth out up top quite a bit. So it's very, very smooth at RPM, right? I know the V4s, they're pretty much smooth kind of throughout, right? So again, I don't know if sometimes I do think that I maybe should have just gotten a V4 to begin with, but at the same time, I don't know, right? The V2 is just, I really don't have any complaints with it. It's been a good ownership experience. It's done very well. It's very poised. It's a joy to ride. It's not too much, but I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like a small bike, right? It's not like riding a 600 where they kind of feel like a small bike. It feels like a baby sport bike because you have no power until 10, 11,000 RPM, right? You have like 40 horsepower below 8,000, 9,000 RPM. While this V2 is not like that at all. You have plenty of torque down low. You have plenty of snap down low, but it also carries that power up top. Again, nothing like an 1103cc V4 or 998cc V4. It's just a different philosophy of use concept. But these V2s are still, I mean, they're pretty fast. So that all being said, I definitely recommend getting one of these bikes. And for me, it's a easy decision to make if you're looking for the specifications that this V2 has, right? And that's 155 horsepower, 955cc V-twin, about 430 to 440 pounds wet and ready to ride, full tank of gas. There's not much competition, right? Anything else, leader bike category is gonna have more power, right? It's gonna be little bit more of an aggressive motorcycle, right? Your V4s, your S1000s, all the standard Japanese leader bikes, your CBR 1000, R1, etc. That's a little bit, that will have a lot more horsepower up top. There's really no middleweight bikes anymore, right? There's the GSX-R 750, but that's not going to have the torque that a V2 has. It's also not going to have the presence that a V2 has. So now when we talk about middleweight sport bikes, we're usually referring to things like the RS660, R7, stuff like that. RS660 is great by Aprilia, but that's a 100 horsepower motorcycle. This is a 155 horsepower motorcycle, and that RS660 is not, it doesn't have near the torque that the V2 has, right? So it's kind of in a class all of its own. So if you're looking for a sport bike that is not as aggressive as your standard leader bikes out there, your V4s and stuff like that, but you want more than just a 600, which is great. 600s are great, but they have no power down low, right? They have like 40 horsepower in the lower RPM range, and that 115, 120 horsepower doesn't come on until after 10, 11,000 RPM, right? This is gonna be more streetable. It's gonna feel faster, just gonna feel much, much faster just in normal day-to-day riding, right? So it's kind of in a class all of its own. It is very special to ride. Before I purchased this motorcycle, I looked at other options out there, and just nothing really compared. It was kind of in a class all of its own. It looks just like the bigger Panigales. It looks just like the V4 Panigales, especially before they changed to the wide body. And as far as performance goes, it's kind of in a class by itself. It's under those standard leader bikes, but it's much above your normal middleweight sport bikes that kind of come to mind. And I think really the only thing that is kind of close are some of the MV Agustas. There's some 800cc MV Agusta triples that are 140 horsepower. So the Super Veloce, the F3. They've got some naked bikes as well, like the Dragster 800. Those will be close in power, but again, they're not going to have the torque that a 955cc twin is going to have. So whether you care about that or not, kind of up to you, but just something that I would like to note. So yeah, guys, that's been my 2.5-year ownership experience with the V2. I don't regret it one bit. I've totally enjoyed owning this motorcycle. It's just been a joy to just look at, to ride, do maintenance on, modify, research, detail, go to various Ducati dealerships across the country to buy a souvenir or whatever. It's been a totally positive ownership experience. I can't complain at all. The motorcycle hasn't been perfect. I mentioned that in the beginning of the video, that there were some kind of small hiccups and stuff like that, but not really a big deal. Nothing that would make me tell somebody not to buy one. And there's still a few more things that I want to do to it. I want to change the rear sets on it. I might want to go to a lightweight battery. There's a few other small things I want to do. I want to remove the rear foot pegs. There is a spacer that you can buy from Ducati to delete those the right way. So be on the lookout for those videos. I'm also looking at possibly purchasing another motorcycle. Not quite sure where I'm going to go with that yet. I don't know if I'm going to be trading something in or whatever, but just kind of be on the lookout for those videos. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that a lot. I really appreciate you guys staying until the end. I hope this review is helpful to somebody out there. These videos, they do take some time to make, but again, I just want to share my experience, just because most of these Panigale V2 reviews, they're kind of just like a ride-in review kind of thing, which is fine. That format, I get it. Totally, that's helpful too. But it's a little bit more helpful when you get a perspective from somebody who has owned the bike since new. It's been 2.5 years. They put a couple thousand miles on it. They do all the maintenance themselves. You have a little bit different perspective. You have a little bit more of a solid basis to base your conclusions on when you have that experience. So anyways, guys, be on the lookout for more videos. I'm going to get back into posting a lot more often, but we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Bye.